What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Selkirk University, your home for product education, comparisons, tips, and really just all things Selkirk. In today's video, I'm going to give you a quick overview on the Project 008 10mm version. Now, out of all of the other versions of the Project 008, meaning the 16mm and 13mm, the 10mm right now is my favorite of the bunch. I'm going to kind of break down why in this video, but be sure to like and subscribe to the Selkirk Sport YouTube channel, as I'm going to be continuing to roll out tons of educational content, not just Selkirk related, but pickleball related as well. But without further ado, let's get into it. So before I get into what I believe makes this paddle really special, I think it'll be helpful to kind of discuss the difference between pop and power when describing the feeling off of a pickleball paddle. So the way I describe the paddle in terms of power performance has to do with contacting the ball when there's not much momentum given or when the ball is close to being at rest. So hitting serves would be a great way to test the power of a paddle. Also, hitting a drive or a ground stroke on a ball that kind of sits up that doesn't have a lot of pace would be a great way to test the power. And maybe even the put away power on kind of a floating overhead or ball kind of at your shoulders. Again, this would be a great way to test the power of the paddle. Now, pop refers to how does the paddle respond when given pace. So if somebody hits the ball hard at you and you're trying to counter punch it back at them, this would be an example of measuring the metric of pop. Or maybe someone has a really hard serve and the ability to kind of take that pace and hit an effortless return would also be a metric of pop. Another way to measure pop might be with some kind of swinging volleys or rolls, depending on how much pace is given to you. So when it comes to the 10mm version, in my opinion, this paddle has far more pop than the 13mm and the 16mm version, and maybe just slightly more power as well. But a couple other things to note when it comes to the 10mm version is that it has a much lower twist weight than the other paddles in the bunch. Now, if you haven't seen my video on twist weight and swing weight, be sure to watch it for the full breakdown on how it affects paddle performance, and I'll leave that in the description below. But when I say this paddle has a low twist weight, what I basically mean is if you were to draw an access point down the center of that paddle, a low twist weight would be the rotation along that axis. So this means a couple things. When you have a low twist weight, you might really be able to create speed and momentum when you're flicking or rolling the pickleball, or when you're generating a lot of spin with a low to high movement. But conversely, if you have a low twist weight, you might get the feeling of mishitting the ball or the illusion that the sweet spot is smaller when really the paddle is just rotating in your hands more easily. That's why when it comes to the 10mm version, I really highly recommend adding perimeter weighting. On this paddle in particular, I have doubled up tungsten tape here and here, kind of right at the bottom corners of the paddle for extra sweet spot and stability. I've just put a little weight here at the top because I didn't feel like it needed that much more extra swing weight. But if you were to take a look at how I set up the 13mm version, I've actually put a lot more weight here at the top, and I do still have some weight here at the corners, but I don't have it doubled up like I do on the 10mm version. And this is my preference for setting up the 13mm version. I want you to kind of listen to the sound of these paddles side by side. So if I were to go ahead and hit the ball up and down, this is the 10mm version. And now if I were to do the 13mm version, see if you notice the difference. So I don't know if you can tell, but there's definitely a little bit more dwell time on the 13mm version. Now, dwell can help the paddle in terms of creating spin, but so can a lower twist weight. So I found that the ability to create spin with the 10mm version was really great in terms of flicking the ball and kind of rolling the ball, and the ability to create spin on a drive or a serve or one of those more powerful shots maybe slightly favored the 13mm version. But again, I would give the edge to the 10mm version overall in terms of power, and I definitely give it a strong edge in terms of pop. The last thing to consider when kind of breaking down the differences between the 10 millimeter and maybe the 13 millimeter or the 16 millimeter version is maybe the climate and where you live. Let me explain. A couple weeks ago, I was playing pickleball in a cooler climate with a little bit thinner and more crisp air. And I was using my 10 millimeter version, and I actually found that my returns were kind of sailing long. And I actually ended up switching back over to the 13 millimeter version, and in that climate, I actually liked it better. Granted, I was also playing indoors, which can have an effect on how fast the ball moves. But I play the majority of my pickleball in Florida, where it tends to be a little warmer and more humid. So when I'm playing in Florida, I definitely prefer the 10 millimeter version, as the ball itself is gonna play a little softer, and so I don't feel like I need quite the same amount of dwell time. So that's something to consider when choosing your paddle, is kind of where you live. Now that I've gotten more used to the 10 millimeter version, I'd probably play with this regardless of where I go, but something to note is how the climate may affect paddle play. Again, the 10 millimeter version is my favorite out of the bunch by far, but that's the beautiful thing about pickleball paddles and why I do all these overviews, is because paddles play different for everyone depending on your play style. So if you've played with the 10 millimeter version, let me know in the comments what you thought, or if you liked the 13 millimeter version or 16 millimeter version, I'd love to know why in the comments as well. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one.